Nothing was where it should have been that night, that first Christmas. Mary and Joseph, they were miles from home, far away from all of not just the comforts, but the familiarity, the safety of home. And Mary, they're giving birth, not in a state-of-the-art birthing center, but giving birth amongst the animals, bringing life into the world where the animals do such things. Not far away, just a few miles away from Bethlehem, in the capital city, the capital of Jerusalem, the capital of God's people, the streets were filled with Roman soldiers, the halls of government too, people who didn't belong there in seats of power over God's people. And then, of course, Jesus, the Prince of Heaven, who belongs in the presence of the Most High God. He found himself in such a coarse and humble place, born right into our mess. See, nothing was where it should have been that first Christmas. And maybe for us this year, perhaps more than any other year, maybe this is a year where we can finally relate. Because here we are this year, in a year where nothing is as it should be, nothing is where it should be. I mean, some of you are not where you usually are at Christmas. You're in another city, you're in another state, you're with other people. Some of you are usually here and now you find yourselves at home online. Some of you are used to having other people with you. There's usually someone who's with you. Maybe you're here, but you're usually joined by others. And now this year, you can't be. They're in isolation for safety reasons, or they're in quarantine for sickness, or they're hospitalized, or worse. Maybe you had to say goodbye to someone. They passed on, they're with Jesus now, and you're trying to figure out how to do this Christmas without them. This is your new normal. Or I know for a lot of us, there's something that's not right, something out of place inside of us this Christmas. I mean, Christmas is usually a season of joy and hope and love and excitement, and for some of us, all of those things have been displaced, and in their place, we now find fatigue and frustration and despair and sadness. See, this Christmas, nothing is as it should be. Nothing is where it should be. And so maybe for the first time in our lives, we're experiencing Christmas just like that first Christmas. And I don't know about you, but when things are not in their place, it makes me crazy. Anyone else? I'm a guy who believes that everything has a place and everything should be in its place. So when I get home at the end of the workday, my family knows that they can say hi to me, but then they know that before I'm gonna engage any of them, I'm gonna put my wallet in its place, my keys in their place, I'm gonna hang up my coat in its place, I'm gonna put my work bag in its place, I'm gonna put my workout bag in its place, and then when I'm done with all of that, I will engage with them because I believe everything should have a place. And so I also find it so frustrating and even disorienting when things are not in their place. Frankly, I don't even really know how to look for lost things because in my mind, nothing should be lost. Things should always be in their place. And if you can resonate with that at all, if you have experienced the frustration and the disorientation of things being displaced, I get it, I just told you I did, but here's what I want you to know tonight. That God's biggest moves in human history, the greatest things that God has ever done, the most powerful acts that God has ever accomplished in our midst, they happened after long periods of displacement. In particular, there are two things that God did in the testimony of the scriptures that are the greatest things that God has ever done. And both of those things happened after long seasons of displacement. The first is the one that you know about. It's the thing that we're here tonight to celebrate. Jesus came into the world to end a long season of displacement. First and foremost, a season of displacement that all of humanity had been experiencing since being cast out of the garden, cast out of the presence of God, cast out of a place of life and wholeness. Jesus came in response to that. But beyond that, and we've been talking about this here at Pathfinder over the last month, Jesus came into a world that had experienced what we've been talking about through our series, this captivity of God's people. We're looking at the minor prophets right now and the major prophets too, and they were writing at a time when God's people had literally been taken into exile. They had been carried away from home, forcibly displaced. And for 70 years, they lived not where they should be. They lived in another place, and after 70 years, some of them were allowed to return home. But some of them never were allowed to return home. Some of them never came back. But even for those who returned home, I'll tell you what, life was never the same for them. Because when they returned home, they found everything different. They found foreign occupiers in their streets and in their halls of government, like I've already told you about. Persia, Greece, Rome. Life was never the same for them. And it's into that kind of setting, not just the 70 years, but the hundreds of years after it, that God responded to these people who had been experiencing displacement for so long. God responded with the birth of his son. That's the story that I think we all know. But there's another one, happened way before then. Another time when God's people were displaced in a nation that you've heard of called Egypt. See, God had made a promise to a man named Abraham that he would be a great and powerful nation, that his descendants would outnumber the stars in the sky, that all nations would be blessed through him. God promised Abraham that his nation would dwell in a certain set of land that he gave to Abraham. But by the third generation of Abraham's family, the family had abandoned their land because there was a famine, and they went to Egypt. And first, things in Egypt were good. If you know the story, they were very good. And then things got bad, and then they got worse, and then they couldn't leave. They were captives there. They were held in slavery in Egypt for hundreds of years. And just as things went from bad to worse to unimaginable, just as the memories of home and the hope of ever going home again faded from their minds, God again caused a baby to be born. This time his name was not Jesus. It was Moses. And unlike Jesus, who left the throne of heaven to come down into our humility, our humble place, Moses was born to a humble Hebrew family, barely escaped death. But then he was found and he was elevated into the house of Pharaoh. He was made the prince of Egypt. And through Moses, God began his work of rescue. See, this pattern is so fascinating, isn't it? That these long periods of displacement are followed by the birth of a child, and then we see God move in the most powerful ways that he has ever moved, first through the Exodus from Egypt, from exile in Egypt, then as God rescued the world from slavery to sin through Jesus. And you know what this shows me today, this year? That while everything is difficult, while things are not as they should be, things are not where they should be, God has a purpose. God has a purpose in our displacement. Actually, two of them. See, first is displacement is revealing, and then displacement is readying. Let me talk about the first one. Displacement is revealing. The reason I don't like it when things get moved from their place, my everything that has a place philosophy, is that for the most part, I live on razor thin margins. And so when it's time to leave the house, I've got to be somewhere now. I'm about to be late. And so I want everything to be in their place so I can grab my coat, I can grab my keys, I can grab my wallet, I can get out of the house as soon as possible. And when things are not in their place, you know what that means? That means I can no longer live in autopilot, just grabbing the stuff where it is. That means I have to stop and I have to look for it. I have to look around. I have to see things that most of the time I'm too busy to see. And living that way is horribly inefficient, isn't it? Where you have to look for everything all the time. Who's got time for that? But it's also revealing. And for me, displacement is not just revealing in that way when we're talking about displaced things, but displacement has been revealing to me when I am the thing that's been displaced. I'm a kid who grew up outside of Ann Arbor, Michigan, in this small rural township. Most of the people I knew had never traveled much outside of Michigan. Generations of people lived there, let alone traveled the country. And so it blows me away that I don't even live in Michigan, for starters. I never imagined that. But that I've been able to travel around the country or around the nation, really, or around the world, I should say, to all different nations around the world. Places that I never thought I would go. And here's what I love in particular about foreign travel. I love that it forces me out of autopilot. That it causes me to open up my eyes and to really see, to take everything in, to experience life. You cannot be in autopilot in a new country, in a foreign country. It's not only dangerous, it's just impossible because you've never been there before. You don't know how to go through autopilot. See, when I am displaced, suddenly my eyes are open, I become aware. Displacement is revealing. And tonight I want to ask you, hasn't God been using this time of displacement? Hasn't he been using it to reveal things to you? I've talked to some people who have talked about how through this time, God has revealed to them that their work-life balance is way out of balance. For other people, I've heard from them that through this time, God has revealed that they took people and things for granted. Maybe for some of you, you've taken your freedom for granted. Maybe for some of you, you've taken your health for granted and you finally see that. Maybe for some of you, you've gotten new insights during this time of displacement where things aren't as they should be, where things aren't where they should be. Maybe you've gotten new insight into your purpose and your calling in this world, that either you're in the wrong one or you feel called into something else, or you've been reaffirmed in that calling. Simply put, maybe during this time, God has given you insight into you. He's given you new perspective. He's revealed things to you about yourself that you have been unwilling or unable to see before. See, God uses displacement. Displacement is revealing, but it's also readying. Here's what I find about me, that when life is good, I hardly think about what's coming next. I don't think much about life beyond here. When I'm going through autopilot and just doing life on my own, I'm pretty focused on the here and now. But when I'm pulled out of autopilot, when things are moved around, when I'm pulled out of maybe even my apathy, then my displacement becomes readying. And you know, historically, that's part of what this season that we're in right now, the season that we're concluding tonight, the season of Advent is all about. It's a season where we ready ourselves, we prepare ourselves, not just for the baby of the birth of that baby in the manger back in Bethlehem, but we prepare ourselves for the second coming of Jesus, who will return in glory for us. That's what Advent's for. But I know for me, I hardly ever think about that, and I bet you're the same. I spend time buying gifts and preparing for Christmas. I don't spend a lot of time during Advent preparing for Jesus' return. But I'll tell you what, during this time of displacement, during the last year, I've thought a lot about Jesus' return. And I've had to ask myself some questions like, am I ready for him to come back? Am I prepared? That little town of Bethlehem sure wasn't. Even though the prophecy said that he was coming there, they were not ready for him when he came. And I don't want to be found like that. When he returns, I want to be found ready. And so I've been asking myself, is my heart ready? Will I be found ready when he comes? Last month, during my own time dealing with COVID personally and quarantine, fighting it myself, I found myself also watching a lot of movies, too many movies. One of the good ones that I watched was a movie called 12 Years a Slave. I'm not sure if you've seen it. It was a hard movie to watch. It was revealing, it was brutal, just reminding me and giving me pictures of what our nation lived through and the horrors of slavery. There were lots of things that were hard to watch about it, but even as I watched all those hard things, those savage things happening, I saw something else as I watched the movie. I saw in these displaced, forsaken, enslaved people, I saw in so many of them in that movie a longing for Jesus and a longing for Jesus to come and take them to their real home. And yeah, in the movie, they also talked about how they wanted life to be better and they wanted rights that were fair and they wanted to be able to keep their families together and whole and they dreamed of that. But here's what they knew. They knew that even if the most perfect nation could be designed by the greatest political scientists and the greatest moral philosophers of the day, that would be a far cry from our true home. There were a lot of things that convicted me as I watched that movie. But the one that convicted me above all was just that here I am. I'm a minister of the gospel, and if anyone knows me, Jesus is kind of my obsession. And yet, most days, I don't long for my real home. Most days, I don't even realize that I'm displaced. I don't even notice that I'm in exile. But in these seasons of disruption, I feel it. I feel the longing. And more than that, I feel in myself this desire, this call of God to prepare myself for what is yet to come. And I mean Jesus' return and heaven someday, yes, but I mean whatever it is that God has next. Because here's what you can know, based on the pattern of God throughout Scripture, that long periods of displacement are always followed by the strong rescue of God, by the movement of God, by the miraculous work of God. And so for us, even in this only 1 year displacement, and I don't know how long it's gonna last, but even in this short time, here's what I believe and here's what we can expect. That God is up to something big. That God will not change who he is and he will not change his patterns. And just like he's always come to displace people in the past and done something powerful in their midst, God will surely come and do something powerful in our midst. We just need to be ready for it. To let this displacement make us ready for whatever it is that God is about to do next. And most of all, I hope tonight you can take this. Don't lose heart. Please don't lose heart. Because I know at times like this, it's easy to feel forsaken. It's easy to feel forgotten, abandoned, like maybe God has left you alone. But here's what I want you to know. In these moments when we find ourselves displaced, that's when we find ourselves in the company of Jesus. Jesus knows what it is to be displaced. He knows exactly what it feels like. It began that night in Bethlehem and it continued throughout his whole life. He gets it, he understands. He's no stranger to it. Not only that, and here's what I want you to just to know and take hold of. That our God is the God of the displaced. That when we find ourselves not where we should be, not where things should be, when nothing is as it is, we find ourselves in the company of God. Because even when we're displaced, God is still God and he is still with us. God is the God of the displaced. He is still Emmanuel tonight, which means he is still with us. Amen. Merry Christmas. Together now, I invite you to pray with me this prayer. I'll pray the first part, and then there's a part for you to join me. You'll see the prompt. Lord, you didn't come to a perfect world. You came into a world of conflict and doubt and fear, to a people weary with hopelessness, lost in darkness, in desperate need of direction. You came humbly, Lord, born of a virgin to a simple family, with the light of your glory seen only by shepherds and sorcerers. You came to a world in a manger, and you left it on a cross. Now pray with me. Now, dear Jesus, come again. Come into my fears and doubts. Make me your dwelling place. Make me humble so I can love and serve like you. Prepare a quiet place within me where peace and joy are born. Lift up my head to behold your mystery, wonder, and beauty. Give me the gift of yourself and make me a gift to the world around me. The world you love, the world you came down to save. For your name's sake, amen.